Welcome to the Serious Insurance Podcast, where we'll bring together professionals from various backgrounds to talk about topics and concerns affecting the construction and real estate risk industry. In the next couple of episodes, panelists will discuss the biggest topic that's affecting everyone, COVID-19. Our industry panelists are leaders in the construction and real estate fields. They will provide a varied perspective on what's happening with the pandemic. In this episode, the panel will talk about the best places to get information on what's happening, how our contractors and owners have been preparing for COVID-19, the legal environment surrounding this pandemic, and other items of concern for contractors, carriers, and real estate developers. We'll discuss the current situation and steps for the future. Thanks for tuning in, and here's the episode. All right, and with that, I would like to introduce our panel here. So we have with us today Carolyn Farino, Head of Insurance at Lend-Lease Americas. How are you doing, Carolyn?
I am well. How are you?
I'm good. What are you drinking?
I am drinking white wine. Chardonnay.
White wine?
Napa Valley.
Looks good.
It is.
Next up, we have Leslie Curry, Executive Vice President at Alliant Insurance Services. How you doing, Leslie?
Hi, guys.
Leslie, what do you have now? I know that's not coffee.
Well, it is. I am 3 hours earlier than the rest of you, but I did get rid of my coffee, and now I'm drinking a glass of champagne with a little splash of lemonade.
We have Naresh Dade, Senior Vice President at Marsh, and also one of the executive producers on the show.
Hi guys, how you doing? I'm sipping on a beer because I don't have any scotch in my apartment.
Yeah, not a bad choice. Speaking of scotch, last but not least, we have Mark Pillinger of PMT Law Firm. For those of us who don't know, they're a big name law firm here in New York and do a ton of business here with our insureds. How are you doing, Mark?
I'm doing well, and I am drinking Oban Scotch, and I had to run out of food and Scotch, so I don't know, man.
I'm jealous, Mark. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm very jealous. So.
I owe you a drink.
If everyone's got their drinks ready, we could get things started. All right, on to the tough stuff. We really wanted to start things off with, kind of the foundation of the industry here, and really what that means for us is the insureds. And what we mean by that are the policyholders, those contractors, owners, developers, whoever it may be that's actually going out and purchasing the insurance, right? Just really generally, I think something that we all want to know is, what are their greatest concerns right now?
First and foremost is, am I going to have coverage tomorrow? There have been some carriers that have looked to make some changes midterm, and it is a big question from everywhere within our company and within the industry. Where do I have coverage? Where do I have gaps? What is my financial exposure? And that is the key question that everybody has at the moment around insurance placements.
Leslie, what are you seeing from some of your clients from your perspective on this?
I think Carolyn's right. I think depending on the size of the contractor right now, a lot of the smaller trade contractors, have all been busy applying for their SBA loans to kind of keep the payroll going. And I think construction is a weird dynamic really in this pandemic because it's considered essential in a lot of geographies. It's been shut down in others. It's even, open in all of Southern California for all construction, and yet Northern California is treated differently. So it's very confusing and hard for contractors, especially those that are still bidding work, to try to manage the expectations of the future.
How do we help out amongst this confusion, Leslie? How do you think is the best way? What are some things we could be doing to help out our contractor partners, our developer partners, whoever it may be?
Sure. I think it's incumbent upon all of us, and I think you have a good, representative group of all of us here today, that it's really looking at things from what is potentially insurable or not. A lot of this is going to fall to the legislative side. Lots of attorneys looking at coverage avenues and just potential litigation. But I think just information, giving credible information, there's a lot of bad information out there. So I think, sharing and making sure that risk managers especially are armed with, all of the relevant, credible information for them to be able to share with their management teams and their project teams to help guide them into, how to manage a job when you're going to have people that test positive on the job site, things that none of us have had to worry about before in any of our careers.
Just as someone who's trying to make sense of this, where are we finding the best sources for this types of information on, best practices, things that we need to know and things that we need to be doing right now?
Certainly OSHA and CDC have given a lot of guidelines for jobs,
Yeah.
right? Following that from a safety perspective, whether it's, how to manage distancing, which that's hard to do, right? On your job sites, Carolyn, but the safety aspects of trying to comply and the actual practical aspects of you're still trying to build a job.
Naresh, what have you been seeing?
Well, in terms of resources, to answer your question, the 3 places I've been looking are the AGC website. They've got a fantastic bunch of resources there that are kind of like accumulation of everything that exists, both from brokers, carriers, lawyers. I would say SDV have been putting out some really good content around COVID-19, business interruption, property damage in general. And from a project finance perspective, Moody's and Fitch, they've been releasing some good content and papers regarding how project finance is affected by COVID-19. But in general, we're seeing a lot of contractors and developers initially worried about protecting their sites and how insurers are really going to treat their sites during this idle period.
We don't have a carrier with us today to represent them, but Naresh, how are they feeling right now? What are their concerns? I'm sure they must be a little bit scared as well with all the uncertainty going on.
I think like everybody, they're in uncharted kind of territory. Nobody really knows. Like Leslie said, we've not really faced something like this before. I think they're obviously quite tentative to provide what their advice and guidance is going to be straight away, because the situation and the virus itself is evolving. So never mind the insurance position. We don't really know the human perspective of this, the economic perspective, the insurance perspective. So there's lots of moving parts. I think there's talks obviously about enforcing carriers to pay for business interruption, which ultimately I think could be very dangerous for the industry as a whole. I think insurers should not refuse claims where coverage is obvious and it does exist and the intention was there.
Zach, if I could just hop in a second, what
Yeah,
I would
please.
say as a client to that, having to explain to senior leadership that a lot of the time element exposures that one would think would be covered and it's not, and the potential introduced legislation, it sounds great on a very short-term, short-sighted solution basis, but from a long-term perspective, if we bankrupt the insurance industry because they're paying for claims that they never intended to pay for, and
Right.
everybody is impacted in some way, shape, or form,
Mm-hmm.
there is not going to be an insurance industry to bounce back from, and we will have a global challenge in trying to place insurance and figure out what do we do next if we start changing things midterm. It's like changing the rules in a game.
Yeah.
Midterm.
Right. And Mark, I don't want to leave you hanging there. I feel like we haven't talked to you in a little while. What do you think about all of this?
Well,
With respect to the carriers specifically.
there are 6 states now that have legislation, proposed legislation, including New York. And I took the time to make a list, and I might be off.
Love lists.
It's New York, Pennsylvania, Louisiana, South Carolina. That surprised me. New Jersey, Massachusetts, and Ohio all have currently in the legislature proposals to compel the carriers to pay business interruption claims. Things that they never priced, never anticipated, and arising out of a virus, and never, we have contracts. the contract is entered into between the insurance company and their insured. And I work both sides.
Okay. Yeah.
But there's an understanding that the contract defines your responsibilities. What the legislature is attempting to do is change the terms and conditions of an existing contract, something that I have never seen or heard of before. And the other thing is, 5 out of the 6 are proposing that the carriers will pay out the money, but then they'll get it back from the states, that the states are going to create
the super funds, right?
Yeah, like, in the 9/11 litigation with the asbestos. Well, and disclaimer, this is Mark Pillinger's opinion under the influence of Scotch. I certainly wouldn't want to be the carrier who relies upon the states, which are already in deep financial trouble, running at tremendous debt, and having to pay and take care of the first responders and healthcare providers to fund this mechanism. Now, many of them say, okay, we'll fund it from the insurance companies. Well, that's like what the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. We're going to make you cover something that you never intended to cover. And then we're going to take the money from the industry to fund the pool, which is going to result in us giving you back your money. I admit it makes no sense to me, and I am no constitutional scholar, but in law school, I learned that Article 1 of the Constitution protects the sanctity of contracts. And I wonder whether these proposals are constitutional, which is probably more than anybody really wanted to hear me say.
Mark, I think to go on your point, especially for the younger viewers, coming out of school and new to the industry, that was the first thing that I thought of, right? Is if you studied con law in college, which I did, enjoyed it, like this is a case study. This is a classic case study. And it's going to be fascinating to see how this rolls out.
For all of the young people, and obviously I'm an old person, but this is
still looking great though.
Everything involving the pandemic is all new. The industry is confronted with things nobody anticipated. We represent a lot of self-insureds in construction. We have a very large construction project. When I speak to my clients, they're concerned about their construction contracts and how to comply with the time limitations in the projects and notice delays and additional costs because they have to incur additional safety measures.
You mentioned, that these contractors are going to have some trouble now that, their projects are delayed or suspended, whatever it may be, meeting the time requirements as set forth in their contracts. Is there anything in those contracts that kind of insulate them or protect them in some sort of a way, Mark?
Yes, maybe. Because I'm a lawyer, that's the way I answer these kind of questions. When we were talking during the prep, you said to me, well, can you argue both sides? And I said,
I did say that.
Who's paying me? I know what side I'm on. But there is a clause in every contract called force majeure. And I was told I have to
say it nice.
Correctly, yes. I went to medical school for 2 years in Paris before I went to law school. I was told during the prep that my French has to be good. What the concept is very simple. It is impossible, if it is impossible or impractical to perform the provisions of a contract, force majeure excuses the performance. But It has to be unforeseen and an uncontrollable event. It has to be an act of God. It's typically applied to wars or strikes. It's also typically applied to property damage when you have significant damage to the site, earthquakes, hurricanes, fires, like in California. But it is very narrowly construed. The courts don't like to do this for the very reason that everything cuts both ways, for the very reason that they don't like to interpret a contract to let somebody out of a contract. They don't want to interpret force majeure as an excuse to not perform your work.
I'm an eternal optimist with this of believing though that, we've all seen this, the PREA wording that's coming out.
Yeah.
To be similar to TRIA ultimately, that carriers can charge insureds and it'll be a surcharge down the road. I do believe that there is going to have to be something with a federal, backstop, some reinsurance type thing like terrorism. And it should be exclusive remedy, because otherwise, I think you mentioned that, Mark, you already have a wrongful death suit that was filed last Friday. There's going to be a run on the courts on those claims. So if you don't have that as exclusive remedy, I mean, people are going to be able to buy insurance. People aren't going to want to go back to work.
Right.
It's problematic for the economy. And I don't know what the timing is of getting a PREA in place. And I know there's wording about trying to make it retroactive, which would solve a lot of problems right now for a lot of insureds, and get businesses back up and running and know that they're going to continue to be solvent. But, the timing, I think that timing gap is going to be, that's going to be a challenge for all of us.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Leslie. I read quite a lot about PREA, and I know our CEO, John Doyle, wrote a letter to Congress, and so did many other people, to kind of advocate for legislation in favour of developing a federal backstop programme like TRIA. So I think that's a very good point. I also heard Lloyds have set aside some money to fund future claims like this, and perhaps even a second surgence of COVID-19 claims. I think they set aside about £15 million as a starter. And I just read something about that today, so that's very interesting. I think that's definitely the approach that's going to be needed, similar to what we've seen for terrorism insurance in the past.
I've certainly heard of TRIA, but I wouldn't even say I have an overview or a comprehensive understanding of exactly what goes into it. So I think just a little overview would be very helpful for us right now.
I don't know a lot about it. Candidly, it's still in its early stages. But for those who are listening, PREA stands for the Pandemic Risk Insurance Act, I believe. Okay. Don't shoot me if I'm wrong. In the letter that I've seen, it was also called the Pandemic Risk Insurance Program, so PRIP. Okay. So it's been going, but PREA is a more popular acronym because it follows that of TRIA, and it has so many parallels that everyone's hoping that this can be streamlined somewhat, because we have precedent, unfortunately, that we can follow in terms of setting this legislation up. And essentially what that legislation would allow for policyholders to access cover for pandemic business interruption through your normal policy, through insurers. And they would then have benefit of having cover from the federal backstop themselves. So just like terrorism insurance, they can provide you with that cover because they know they have protection from the government if claims breach a certain threshold. For example, $250 million in the aggregate, that program would then be triggered, which would allow insurers to then be protected.
Right. So how this works would be just like TRIA. Whenever you're going to purchase an insurance policy, you could sort of buy into that, right? It would be an additional surcharge down at the bottom that money gets put together into some sort of a pool, and then that would be used in the events that, there's another pandemic or these claims would have to be paid out. Is that about right?
Yep.
Okay. I kind of want to switch gears towards safety at this point. And really the first thing that I was wondering was, what were the insurers, what were these contractors, job site owners, developers doing, if there was anything pre-COVID, to prepare for an instance like this? And then what did they rapidly have to put into action in order to, I guess, really handle and deal with this very quick moving pandemic? Leslie, what have you seen mostly in those regards?
I think I think for the most part, I think construction was in a pretty good spot in terms of, you know, they have hand washing stations. They are supposed to wear PPE, right, for all the trades. There's a lot of good things. Certainly the 6-foot distancing that I alluded to earlier, that's sometimes impossible for trades if they're doing a certain job duty. So some of this stuff is going to have to be, you know, rewritten of, you know, maybe the sequencing of trades. And I'll really defer to Carolyn, who knows a lot more than I in terms of, you know, how are you restructuring a job site to be able to manage and protect the workers, and then really the protocols, which we've seen, all of us, I'm sure, have seen this now because construction is still going on all over the place, of, you know, what happens when somebody tests positive and what protocols need to, you know, take place to shut down the job, clean the job, and then wait to let people come back in. So Carolyn?
Let's take it a couple of steps at a time. I'm going to start with Zach's question, which was, how do you prepare for something like this? One of the benefits, I guess, of being a global company is we were in conversations very early on with our counterparts, both from a risk and insurance standpoint, as well as NEH&S, and talking through what is going on and how are our construction projects, as well as our owned assets from a real estate standpoint, managing in Asia. And we were able to have lessons learned already from how they were responding, brought forth to how we were responding regionally within the Americas. I've talked to some others, and I know that city entities are working on, every employee is responsible for reporting what is their temperature on a daily basis. And from a personal standpoint, my husband works for the FDNY and he has to report in, I feel okay, my temperature is, and that is done on a daily basis. Something similar like that I could see becoming the norm on construction sites. There will be a lot of logistical documents that come into play, and it won't be the site is open, everybody comes back to business as usual. It's going to be a slow approach. That's on a construction project standpoint. As an employer, as a leader for an organization, I would say that there will be a lot of evaluation as to what employees come back to an office space for, how long. Do you have alternate work schedules where one group is in week 1 and 3 and the other group is in 2 and 4, and how do you social distance within an office space? And those are also being looked at and evaluated within the organization. And I know a lot of organizations are going through the same process.
Let's pick it up here. We were talking about the communicable disease endorsement, which you mentioned it was the ISO standard. My understanding is, tell me if I'm wrong, that means that, you know, all these ISO policies, basically, it's getting printed out and thrown into it. And I think that was in response to a previous pandemic, endemic, whatever it may be. That's what a lot of these underwriters are hanging their hat on, right, for denial of coverage.
Do you want me to pick that up?
Yeah, I mean, am I understanding this correctly?
Yes, and I don't want the listeners, the viewers, especially if you're new in the business, to come away with the impression that there's a blanket statement, there is no coverage for this. After you've been in this industry for a while, you will learn you can insure anything if you're willing to pay for it. And the ISO form there is a communicable disease exclusion, which is an existing ISO form, which of course has to be added into the policy,
Right.
which excludes this. I've also seen specific exclusion that addresses viruses in a policy. But that said, I've also seen, and actually one of my clients have, a contagion event endorsement in their policy, which puts in coverage for this, which goes back to our constant theme of today, which is, in my opinion, the insurance policy is a contract. And a contract is interpreted on the four corners of the document and not by government, and that's my opinion. And before you come to any decision on what is or is not covered, if you take away anything else from me today, it's read the policy. Because I cannot tell you how embarrassing it is to give, not that I ever did it, to give an opinion and then find out that there's an endorsement in the policy that changes everything you said. It's the quickest way for me to lose a client. Not my friends on the panel. They would keep me on anyway, even if I screwed up. But
Keep you on for your smile.
But that is such a critical thing to say. It is what seems to be fundamentally simple, but so many people don't do it. And that is simply, you have to read your policy to know what the terms and conditions are. And I would say to people starting in the industry, the best way to learn coverage is to read the policy. Every policy you can get your hands on, I still do it manually. I will in a policy cross off sections, refer to other sections, even in PDF writer, so that you know what that policy terms and conditions do, because it's going to ultimately be the 109th page that changed the opinion that you had 5 minutes into reading the policy.
Yeah. That's a good point. And I think for anyone listening, the best time to learn about insurance is actually when you have a claim. So embrace it, because now you're actually going to learn what the policy does, what it was supposed to do to begin with, i.e. the contract, and what it will do eventually at the end. I'd just like to add to Mark's point, coverage has existed for pandemic risks for a long time. It's just been quite expensive and not that popular. It grew in popularity in 2003 following SARS, which was obviously not as deadly and had less of an impact. I think there was a parallel drawn to like China's GDP at the time. 2003 was like 3 or 4%, whereas now it's like 17 or 19%, depending on who you listen to. So that has a big impact in terms of supply. Anyway, not wanting to go off on a tangent there, the point I was going to make is that the question I normally ask my clients on the builder's risk side is quite simple. I normally ask them, is it damaged? And if it's not damaged, it means either the cover is excluded, or it's sublimited, or the cover will be minimal, basically. And a number of broad form of policies, especially placed in London and those in international markets, actually had extensions for communicable disease and infectious diseases and the like. So some cover does exist, but I will say hurdles do exist in terms of triggering that cover. But I just wanted to let everybody know that cover specifically for pandemic risks has existed, and there have been extensions to various other policies that can provide cover, but it's not easy sometimes to trigger those covers, is what I would say, especially when they're endorsed to other forms not specifically addressed to cover pandemic risk.
For reopening a job site that had been closed down for a month or so, what do we need to be doing right now to prepare for that, and how is that process going to work out?
I think it's going to be a multi-step process. It's going to be looking at JHA's, job hazard analysis, in a different way. And it's going to be, how do I keep the workers safe? How do I keep my employees safe? Depending on the jurisdiction that construction is taking place in, the unions may or may not have a relevant play within that conversation, and only because that they may not exist. But where they do, they may be providing the PPE for their employees. Where they're not, the construction manager may be responsible for making sure that you want to come to work. It's no different than having your hard hat and safety glasses and safety boots is the new norm, to have a face shield. And if so, to what extent is the new norm to have what I would classify as bloodborne pathogen type gloves, not just a workman's glove, but something that can protect you from bodily fluids, which is a completely different environment from what people are used to working in. But it is ensuring the safety and welfare of the workers as they're coming back, doing temperature scans, potentially having staggered work days or work hours, having the workday shift completely. We may go from having a construction site being open 7 to 3, maybe we now have it 2 to 1, so that those workers are no longer commuting during normal business hours or normal construction hours, and having different construction projects stagger when they start. It's going to be a different environment. I think that the way I've said this a number of times is, the norm that we came in on January 1st of 2020 will never be the same norm again. We will have a new way of doing business, and that is being redefined on a daily basis based on facts that are presented to employers, to contractors, so that we can respond nimbly and make sure that everybody is protected.
Right. Like Carolyn, you said, the normal as of January 1st, 2020, that's not it anymore. We're not going to be able to hit that. So, my question right now, and I know that a lot of my younger colleagues in risk management would want to know, how are they communicating to their project teams about what's going on in the insurance world specifically? How can their project teams make sense of that? Carolyn, did you want to take the lead on this one?
Sure. The insurance and risk teams, as well as the legal teams, are very busy in these times, as
sure.
are the financial teams, trying to figure out how do we keep going. Mark mentioned it earlier that some contractors have very large retentions, and they're trying to figure out how do I continue to operate. But with all of that comes a lot of questions, and working for a company that's got a lot of diversity in the operations, from construction to property management and asset management to development, we're looking at a broad array of different questions, and being able to communicate up and down the chain, out to the project teams, but up to senior leadership as well. And a lot of that comes from gathering as much information as you can from your brokers, from reading your policies. Sometimes it's a matter of having conversations with outside coverage counsel and saying, how do you interpret this policy? A court may interpret it differently, but this is how I see it. So how do you see it? And taking that type of conversation and being able to disseminate to the project teams, how is that being impacted from an asset management standpoint? What do you have when somebody wants to break a lease, break a contract where they've entered into to purchase a unit, if it's a condo building, and or now you've got financial stresses because of delays in rent payments, et cetera. And conversely, looking at it from a standpoint of where do I have insurance? Do I have insurance for force majeure? Because that's a question that a lot of project teams would think that there would be coverage. The government said I have to shut down, so where is my insurance for that? And being able to have those conversations, what I would say is my key takeaway from this for anybody coming into the industry or being earlier in their career is bad news is best given early and often. Sometimes you have to say things that people don't want to hear, but sometimes that message is you need to communicate early and often, even if it's bad news, especially if it's bad news.
Right. Cheers to everyone. Hope to talk to you soon. Hope to have you on the show soon.
Cheers to all of
We'll
you.
take that right now.
Nice
All
to see
right.
you.
Cheers, guys. Thank you so much.
Bye.